When you're building out a board portfolio, it can certainly feel like a lot of hard work, and the first year is often the hardest to get some traction in the market, and then the second year gets a little bit easier, and then hopefully by the third year you're absolutely flying along. What I find is that in the first year, it's about getting the foundations right. And initially, executives who maybe have had a very successful corporate life, who are now transitioning to become board members, board directors on a full-time basis, will find that there's a period of kind of earning your stripes, getting a few runs on the board, getting connected in with the right people, having the right materials to present yourself. And what we often try and encourage our clients to do is to look for 1 or 2 stepping stone board seats. Now, these will often be quite modest board appointments, but they get the board portfolio off the ground. They get the sort of the initial legwork done. Once you've got 1 board seat, you can get 2. If you can get 2, you can get 3. Board careers are incremental. So where you start is not where you're going to finish, but you do need to typically get at least 2 board seats onto the CV before you start applying for those higher profile board roles. And so I'll often guide my clients, those first stepping stone board seats could be quite modest. It could be a not-for-profit board, could be a charity, it could be a membership, an industry style board. It could be an early stage, high potential company. It could be a small private company. Commercially viable companies are certainly perfect to put on the CV. Relatively small, relatively modest, might not be paid a lot, but it gets you started, if you like. And the big mistake a lot of executives make is they go for gold initially. They go straight for the high profile $60,000 a year board seat, and they just don't have the runs on the board. They've got a corporate career on their CV, and they're thinking they're just going to automatically come across into the board recruitment market and start at a pretty high level. And it just doesn't occur that way. So you have to put the ego aside. You have to be strategic. You've got to get a couple of small, modest board seats onto the CV. I'll never forget, years ago, I was working with a very high profile managing partner from one of the big law firms, and he'd spent the whole year trying to get board seats, and he'd gone and seen all the top search firms like Korn Ferry and Egon Zehnder, and he'd got nowhere. After 12 months, didn't have a single board role to show for himself. And I said to him, look, you're a fabulous executive, you've got a lot of great skills, but people are still perceiving you as a managing partner, as a lawyer. You've got expertise, but you need to get a couple of small runs on the board, and then everything will take care of itself from there. Now, thankfully, he did take my advice, and what we did was we put him onto a small private corporate wellness company, very small, modest. I think it was only about $1 million turnover. It was tiny. But we put him in there as the chairman of this corporate wellness company, which made a lot of sense because he'd worked in the law. He'd seen corporate wellness become an increasingly important issue in law firms. So he was able to add immediate value to this smallish company. And we took him on to another sort of startup business. It was a roof tiling business, very, very interesting, had some R&D grants, had some real success, but again, modest company, took him in there as the chairman, and instantly 2 board seats onto the CV, albeit very small companies, but they looked interesting and they looked very strategic, and that enabled him to then get his first proper paid board seat. And it was putting the ego aside, being realistic, just getting a few little runs on the board, and it made all the difference. And the number one rule you've got to remember is that board careers are incremental. Each role leads to the next. And so you start modestly. You start with a not-for-profit. You start with a small company. You start with a startup or an upstart. And then that leads to another, and then that leads to another. And each step of the way, you're building out your networks, you're building out your experiences. So take it from me, I've been involved in building out thousands of board portfolios for business executives. I have never seen anyone break that rule that you have to start modestly to get going. And it's the executives that ignore the rule, who want to just go straight for gold. They end up actually not having a board career at all, because they just don't get the runs on the board and they don't get the traction. And they sit there waiting for Prince Charming to arrive. They sit there waiting for the perfect board seat to arrive, and it never happens. So get in touch with me. I'd love to give you a complimentary board career assessment. I can help give you some advice as to whether you have the right skills, the experience, the competencies to serve in a modern boardroom setting, and I can give you some practical advice on what steps you should take to begin your board career.